This video is sponsored by my music project Raccoon Tour. We are releasing a new single and music video on October 29th. We're also playing a show in Boise, Idaho at the Shredder on the exact same day. Our song, Sorry Sarah, got some love on TikTok recently, and you can find it on our limited edition 7-inch vinyl record, which is kind of running low on stock right now, not to freak you out or anything like that. Yeah, we'll have some cool announcements and music for you really soon by the end of the month. Happy spooky season. This is my 5th year doing Halloween specials on my channel. I've never missed a year, I go ages without uploading, but man, come October, I wake the frick up and I need to post something. This year, I want to talk about horror movies. I can't think of a more beloved genre of movies. Nobody's ever like, hey, I'm a drama movie guy, or man, I sure do love historical comedies, but people who like horror movies love horror movies. And I'm one of them. I've seen a lot of horror movies, and I'm here to walk you through the genre. I'm not going to teach you how to survive inside a horror movie because that joke has been done to death. I mean, like, Geico did a commercial on it. Instead, I'll give you a survival guide to thrive in your journey to become a horror movie expert. A few tips for horror movies. There is a correct way to watch each film. Something like Get Out would be a blast to watch with friends, but something like Hereditary, not so much. I always recommend setting aside the night to take in a film. Get the room dark, whatever streaming device you have probably has Bluetooth support, so you can probably use headphones. I use a pair of Sony XB900Ns, and it's like you're in a movie theater. AirPods Pro Max would probably be amazing to use for film as well. Yeah, sound, especially in horror, is so important. Give every movie the opportunity it needs to put its best foot forward. Also, go in as blind as possible if you can. I try to imagine what it must have been like seeing The Exorcist or Alien completely blind. I mean, what a trip that must have been. The first time I saw those movies, I already knew every trick they had up their sleeves. It's like it was deflated and sad. Don't let the same thing happen to you with future films. Finally, tips for if you're a scared little baby. The point of horror movies is to scare you. I find it best to give them the opportunity to scare you. Neutering the experience sucks the life out of it, so I recommend folks not do anything I'm about to suggest here unless you absolutely have to. If a movie appears too daunting but you still want to watch it, a few things you can do are watch the film in a group, preferably with funny friends. Watch during the daytime. Read the IMDb parents guide so you know how intense things get. Take little breaks in the middle if necessary. Have a friend who's already seen the film warn you when to close your eyes and ears. Sound can cause you to imagine stuff that's far worse than whatever's on the screen. Watch a video editorial on YouTube about whatever movie you're interested in seeing before actually sitting down and committing to it. Yeah, please don't actually do these things unless you're okay with ruining the experience. I'm just including these here because someone's gonna ask for them in the comments. Okay, let's talk about horror movies themselves. I have this theory that every horror movie can be accurately described using 2 of these 4 descriptors: spooky, goofy, gory, and ruin your day. Spooky movies tend to focus on supernatural elements, atmosphere, some fantasy. They tend to have a fairy tale-esque setup and use of irony. Ghosts and goblins and the like. This is a classifier that most people think of when horror movies come to mind, and it's important that spooky isn't the only factor at play here. Ancient curses, monsters terrorizing towns, kids on bikes going on adventures because none of the adults in town believe them about anything, the undead, etc. Goofy horror movies are strange and absurd, a bit bizarre. They can be funny for sure, but I wouldn't say they're all comedies or anything. You can be a goofy horror movie and still not be funny one bit. I will have some examples later on, trust me. The goofy categorization is a bit strange because I can't really nail it down, you just feel it. You know it when you see it. They tend to be the kind of movies I tell my friends about because the premises and preceding events are so weird. Here you'll find bizarre inhuman experiments done to ace your college courses or rekindle a lost love to a walrus. Bratwurst cell phones to talk to the dead, werewolves, not swearwolves. Yeah, these movies get weird and I love it. Gory is exactly what it sounds like. A lot of the movie's shocks and thrills rely on physical forms of suffering and bodily, modifications, if you will. There are generally 2 different directions gore can go with very different outcomes. You can show a bunch of obnoxious teenagers get chopped up and eaten by dogs. That's super fun and awesome. Or you could show a family you've spent the last hour and a half getting to know and learning to care for only to see them get chopped up and fed to dogs. That's less fun. Not all gore is made equally. Remember that as we head into our final category, ruin your day horror movies. These films tend to lean more into psychological and character-driven horror. I call them ruin your day horror movies because I don't enjoy watching them. I mean, I do watch them, and some of my favorite movies ever would fall into this category, but I don't think, man, I'm having such a good time watching this as I'm in the theater. This is where true terror lies, in my opinion. This is the stuff that keeps me up at night. These movies tend to be more grounded, regardless of supernatural elements. This is 100% tone, and when it's done correctly, you truly feel it. These movies are not for beginners, period. Now, my theory is that you can classify any horror movie by combining two of these descriptors. Each one of the combinations is definitely its own little microgenre. We'll go through them one at a time, and I'll give you movie recommendations and mini reviews based on all of them. Lists are fun. One last note here, these are horror movies. Some are fun and some are very much not. Please keep in mind that a lot of the films I'm going to recommend here absolutely contain triggering content like sexual assault, violence against women and children, actual deaths of animals shown on screen, self-harm and suicide, the works. I'm not going to tell you which movies contain these elements since I don't want to ruin the shock and surprise for everybody else. If you want to watch one of these movies I mentioned but you're worried about these elements being featured, definitely check out doesthedogdie.com, where they have lists of like 80 triggers for every movie. It's a nice middle ground here. You get to protect yourself while everybody else gets to enjoy the shock and awe of witnessing horrible things on screen. Everybody wins. Happy Halloween. We will start off easy, spooky goofy. This is where you're gonna find stuff about monsters and curses and all that. The film's top priority isn't inherently to scare the pants off you most of the time. This is what most teenagers and folks go to see in movie theaters. This is the perfect recipe for Halloween movies. I'll give a few examples. Trick or Treat is the best Halloween film ever crafted in my opinion. Every segment of this movie is brilliant, the atmosphere is second to none. I also do have a soft spot in my heart for movies that are not afraid to absolutely brutalize children and kill them horribly. What We Do in the Shadows is consistently funny. It takes a simple premise that would be a stellar short film and it stretches it to its absolute limits. Modern day vampires would absolutely be weirdos and werewolves would absolutely be straight edge losers. This is hilarious.
Hey, don't swear.
Sorry,
We're werewolves.
Not
What are we?
werewolves, not werewolves.
It Follows is certainly far more serious than the last few movies I recommended, but the thing is, there's absolutely a strangeness about it. From the vague time period it takes place in, the music, the tone, the strangeness of the curse explored in the movie itself, this is absolutely a spooky and bizarre movie that everybody should watch. John dies in the end. I have strong opinions about this movie. When it's good, it's good. It is so good. I'm a fan of the book series that it's based on, and there are some scenes that are word for word lifted from the novel. The first time I saw this, my mind was blown. There are so many weird and cool ideas at play here, and most of them work. The casting is excellent, the tone is spot on, it's punk rock, it's legitimately scary at times, and it features an awesome selection of gore and violence too. It's just, when they miss the mark, they flop hard. They should have either added an additional 20 to 40 minutes to give the characters Amy and Albert Marconi a reason to exist in the story, or just remove them entirely. The ending does get a little too silly for its own good, featuring CGI that looks bad even by most CW shows. Disappointed book fan mumblings aside, once you get to the 1 hour, 12 minute, 55 second mark, you have my permission to turn it off and go read the book or something. But I'll tell you what, the movie up to that point is brilliant. Amazing, spectacular. By the way, I just gotta throw this out there. If you watch the movie and you enjoy it, I highly recommend the book series. The novels offer up so much more grit, edge, and world building. The sequel, This Book is Full of Spiders, is one of my favorite horror novels ever, and I wholeheartedly believe that it deserves a Netflix animated series akin to Castlevania. The most recent book, What the Hell Did I Just Read, got under my skin and some excellent character-driven horror as well. This series is awesome. Okay, tangent over. For spooky, gory films, things get a little less silly. You have those supernatural and strange elements still, for sure, but now they're trying to hurt you. And chances are they succeed in hurting quite a few folks if there's a movie being made about them doing just that. Something about this genre in particular is so visceral. Traditionally speaking, ghosts and monsters aren't always bound to human limitations, so when it comes to dispatching teenagers, the possibilities are endless. This category in particular is a lot of fun. I recommend R.L. Stine's Fear Street on Netflix. I have not had this much fun with a horror film in years. I read these books as a kid, and this trilogy of movies was astounding. It was everything I wanted it to be and more. If you go in expecting an R-rated Goosebumps goosebumps, you're gonna have one hell of a time. This movie perfectly balances graphic horror violence with more lighthearted spirit of like a 90s horror film. Seriously, I was contemplating making a totally separate video just to gush about how much I love these movies. If you watch anything from this list for Halloween, make it these movies. If enough people love them like I did, Netflix will hopefully give us some more. Side note, I love these movies so much I went out of my way to purchase the entire trilogy on VHS. Check out Katie Video on Instagram. She has an amazing service where she creates VHS releases for contemporary movies, stuff like Coraline and Hereditary and stuff. She's amazing. Huge shout out to her. She's taken quite a bit of my money and I'm excited to give her more of it. Sinister is one frightening movie with a fascinating mystery at heart. Sure, it's kind of hindered by some disappointingly cliched reveals and stuff, but when this movie gets spooky, it's spooky. There's some evil stuff on display in this film, and the ending of it still unsettles me after all these years. It is a blast of a film. I highly recommend watching it alone at night. VHS is a collection of short films, some better than others, but when it gets freaky, it gets horrific. The first segment shown is called Amateur Night, and it is one of the scariest things that has ever been shown in a movie theater, I think. Second Honeymoon kinda sucked. Thursday the 17th is dumb and feels like a high school film project. The sick thing that happened to Emily when she was younger has a cool setup and middle bit, but the payoff is a little disappointing. And Halloween 98 ends the film on another high note with wonderfully trippy, atmospheric stuff. Basically, the first and last shot of this anthology are great. Everything else is meh. The two good examples are worth checking out though, I promise. Now we move on to Spooky Ruin Your Day. This is generally where there are supernatural elements at play, but the movies aren't clowning around with them. These ghosts and monsters are probably not only gonna kill you, but they're also interested in killing your family, your children, making you cry, ruining your credit score. There's a lot of A24 stuff ahead. I do love me some A24 horror. The pinnacle example of this genre is Hereditary. Watching this movie in theaters was the single most surreal experience I've ever had with a film. When someone asks me what the scariest movie I've ever seen is, I always say Hereditary. Does it have the most blood? No. Does it have endless jump scares? There's one. Most of it is just people arguing, but man, does it get under my skin. I think it's how this movie juxtaposes family drama with some truly twisted scares. Truly twisted. This movie isn't scary because it's bad things happening to people. It's scary because it spends a lot of its time making you care for these people and then putting them through some of the most trauma I've ever seen anyone experience in a horror film. There is something animalistic and primal about how truly awful this movie is. I use those specific terms because almost everyone finds a lot of stability and reliance in family. But part of growing up is realizing that the people who cared for you your entire life are malleable and just as prone to being ripped apart and decimated as you. That realization leads you to feel like a scared dog in an open highway. Well, for me at least. That specific horrifying sensation is what makes this movie so special to me. This is a truly disturbing, truly scary, truly traumatic film, and I don't think I ever want to see it again. It is one of my favorite works of art ever. Hereditary is so special. This is one that you absolutely need to watch by yourself in a dark room with a good sound system and a big screen. This is the most traumatic film I've ever seen, and I've seen some pretty twisted stuff. The Blair Witch Project is a little dated when viewed today, but the lore on display, the fascinating behind-the-scenes stories, and a truly terrifying final act make this a really special and really scary film. Fun fact, I actually got to meet and talk with one of the men who directed this classic. It was a really surreal experience. The Shining is The Shining. There is nothing I can say that hasn't been said about The Shining. It is a flawless horror movie. I don't care what Stephen King thinks about it. If you haven't seen this movie yet, do so tonight. Seriously, I'm not finoodling around. The Witch is a pretty scary movie if you adjust your expectations. Don't go in expecting jump scares and gore and serial killers or really much of anything aside from a miserable, confusing, sad horror movie where most of its trauma is implied rather than shown. This is a big kid movie, no babies allowed. Also, you're gonna want to turn on subtitles. Finally, in this category, we have Saint Maud, probably the least scary movie on here, but there's still some pretty freaky ideas at play here. It's also pretty unambiguous about its stance on religion and stuff. If you're in the mood for a creepy, slow build movie with a powerful theme, this is a stellar watch. Now, we have Goofy Gory. These movies tend to kind of thrive on the absurdity of certain kinds of body mutilations and violations, as well as riffing on movies where the key element and draw is stimulus featured in good old-fashioned blood and guts. They're not all comedies for certain, but they are all strange to a certain degree. There is some excellent satirical stuff in here too. Take, for example, TUSK. TUSK is a movie. Listen, if you're the kind of person who will like this movie, you've already seen it. If you've never heard of this movie, go in blind and watch it. I'm not gonna spoil anything. Don't read the synopsis, don't read reviews, just watch it. Johnny Depp is in it. If you're needing a selling point or anything, just see it. Knowing anything about this movie does it a disservice. I watched RE-ANIMATOR for the first time last year. It stuck with me. This is such a special movie with a sense of insanity and ridiculous, as well as some wonderful gore and a few genuinely shocking scenes. Back in the day, this movie was bonkers. They didn't know what to do with it. It got an NC-17 rating in the 80s, which is pretty much the same rating they give to porn. This movie isn't pornographic by any stretch of imagination, but it certainly does take gleeful joy in showing some pretty impressive body horror. I loved this movie. Add it to your list if you've never seen it yet. Scream is awesome. It's definitely one you'll appreciate and enjoy more if you're a seasoned horror fan. It basically asks the question of what would happen if an 80s style serial killer popped up in real life. That introduces some neat dynamics. Folks would become fascinated and obsessed with the theatrics of it. Horror movies exist, so it kind of makes obvious sense for people to try and outsmart the killer using skills and thought processes they've picked up watching other films. The playfulness that this movie has with its genre, along with some legitimately scary sequences at the end, make this a really special work of art that is still great today. Get Out is brilliant. Jordan Peele is brilliant. I love everything he touches now. The themes in this movie are brilliantly echoed with specific acts of violence that take place. The way this film and its screenplay take advantage of horror tropes to make a powerful message come to fruition is so clever. On top of the socio-political elements, this is just a really great horror thriller as well. The Evil Dead is my favorite horror film franchise ever. I got to go see a screening of the first movie with Bruce Campbell, who plays the lead character Ashley Williams. Basically, Sam Raimi and his friends set out to make a scary film and just wound up making a comedy, essentially. So in their sequel, they just doubled down and made it silly. The third movie, Army of Darkness, is just a straight-up unapologetic Jim Carrey-style comedy. The making of these movies is just as interesting as the films themselves. If you're interested in horror, The Evil Dead is a really great place to start. Your next is Awesome. Such a cool movie. I loved this movie. I knew going in that it would be some self-aware slasher home invasion film that would try to subvert my expectations. Even going in expecting that, it still pulled the rug out from under me a few times. This movie is great, and the less you know about it, the better. I loved it. Okay, now this is a weird category. Goofy Ruin Your Day. How can a movie be goofy but also ruin my day? Easy. These are horror movies where the thrills and chills come from discomfort, shock, and awe. These movies break taboos with gleeful abandon. Wait until TikTok finds these movies. These directors would be canceled so hard by those kids. Speaking of kids, no kid should ever watch any of these movies. Period. Absolutely not. Dogtooth is a disturbing movie about control, human nature, and the dangers of attempting to sanitize the world for the sake of others. This movie explores some themes with graphic, unflinching, and wildly uncomfortable depictions of a traumatic family dynamic. This movie particularly got under my skin because it is eerily realistic. I've been friends with a lot of people from religiously fanatical families. There are a lot of quirks in how they act, and this movie perfectly captures those tics. There's something unsettling and scary about the childlike innocence and unawareness of the terrors around them, and seeing what are essentially children try to grapple with very adult issues with no basis of understanding of what's happening. That's a good premise for a horror movie, apparently. Pink flamingos. How can I put this delicately? If you've ever used a trigger warning or a parental advisory to make a decision on whether or not you should watch a movie, you should not watch this movie. This movie is famous for being one of the most depraved, nasty, grotesque pieces of media ever crafted by human hands without wandering into snuff or pornography. And it does creep eerily close to those descriptors at times. This movie is offensive with pretty much every single ideology that we hold to be sacred and important trampled on and made a mockery of. It's homophobic, transphobic, classist, ableist, and they literally kill an animal on screen in an act of bestiality. And don't even get me started on the amount of rape and sexual assault that's featured and laughed at throughout this movie. It is by all means an indefensible film, and if you hold yourself to be a human being with the most basic sense of decency, you're probably gonna be shocked by something, but man, if it's not hypnotic. Should anyone watch this movie? That's a big question, not for me to say. But this movie exists, and I'm glad to live in a world where insane stuff like this is around if you just so happen to hate yourself enough to subject yourself to it for one day. John Waters is a genius in the worst possible way, and I'm enchanted by everything he does. If you know what to expect going in, have a good time. Come to Daddy has Elijah Wood as a douchey SoundCloud rapper who goes to visit his dad, but there's something weird about him. This is the kind of movie where you start off watching one thing and by the end it's completely different. There's some good writing in here, there's some truly bonkers scenarios, and some of the coolest and most brutal violence I've seen in a movie in a really long time. Is this straight horror? Not really. Did it get under my skin enough for me to compel myself to put it on here? Yeah. Plus it has Elijah Wood, he's wonderful. Watch his Hot Ones episode, the dude would be so much fun to hang out with. Here we are, the final category. The one where I advise you to use caution with every one of these recommendations. This is potent stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Gory, Ruin Your Day. If you're in the mood for a movie where nothing good happens, it's non-stop visceral stimuli that purely exist to assault you and make you feel bad, this is it. These are the kinds of horror movies I'd show to a romantic partner over the years to test their mettle. Here's a hint, very few people are actually able to sit through these films with me. They're uncomfortable, they're unpleasant, they're absolutely not fun to watch, and they're some of the most intense experiences you'll ever have watching a movie. Proceed with caution, all of these are for experienced horror film viewers only. My discussions on these films are going to be particularly unrestricted and graphic, so be warned going forward, please. Martyrs is the most intense film I've ever seen. The movie practically opens with a family with children being brutally murdered by a home invader. That is arguably the least disturbing thing to happen in its entire runtime. Martyrs is a lot. There are not a lot of things that I can say about Martyrs, not because there's not a lot to talk about, but because I don't have a lot of words that can do this movie justice. You can go to the gym, or you can watch Martyrs. Both will burn calories. You can hack off your hand with a table saw, or you can watch Martyrs. Both are equally fun to endure. You can drink a bottle of hand sanitizer, or you can watch Martyrs. Both will make you want to throw up equally. I remember watching this movie and every 10 minutes thinking to myself, oh, so this is why everybody says this movie's disturbing. Oh wait, this is why people say it's so disturbing. Okay, this has to be as intense as it gets because there's no way it gets worse than how is there an hour left in the runtime? And by the end, you'll be wondering what kind of broken person has the capacity to make this. Turns out Pascal Laugier is a super friendly and interesting dude. I love this movie. I adore it. It is some of the most unapologetically gruesome, hellish, traumatizing stuff ever put to film, and very few people should see this movie. I never want to watch it again, but if it's still able to make my stomach do flip-flops even a year after watching it, you know this is something special. Incident in a Ghostland is by the same director as Martyrs, Pascal Laugier. Where Martyrs sets out to destroy your stomach and induce shock and terror, Ghostland sets out to crush your heart and soul using every single cruel trick in the book. This is a cruel movie. It features one of the nastiest plot twists I've ever seen a horror film use that completely recontextualizes and shakes up the film. It is so clever and it is so scary. It is so brutal in terms of how unapologetically it messes with its audience. You should go in as blind as possible for this one. Here's the live reaction of a friend who watched it on my recommendation. Wolf Creek is one of the scariest movies I've ever seen. Let's say there is a real scenario where you found yourself kidnapped by a serial killer in the middle of nowhere. In most movies, that would lead to some grisly fun antics where annoying teenagers would get killed off creatively. But in real life, it wouldn't be as fun. Realistically speaking, you would be subjected to torture, all physical, sexual, emotional, and mental. You would be dehumanized, crippled beyond hope of returning to life as you knew it, and you would probably watch your friends die before your eyes. It's a pretty one-sided dynamic dynamic, and Wolf Creek captures that perfectly. I do not have nightmares about Jason Voorhees or Freddy Krueger. I have actual real-life nightmares about Mick Taylor. He feels like a real person mainly because I know people like him. I'm related to a lot of people like him, minus the murderer part. If I found myself in this movie, I would probably die, even if I did my best to outsmart him and get away. It's that horrible sense of groundedness that sets this movie apart. The sequel and TV series are great in their own sense of fun, but none of them come close to the brutality of the original Wolf Creek. Funny Games is a movie that is so horrible that it raises an ethical quandary of whether or not you should be watching it at all. A family is held hostage in their own home by some of the most charming and fun to watch horror movie bad guys ever put to screen. I'm gonna be honest, I couldn't finish this one. I've never seen the ending to this movie. I read the Wikipedia article and decided I'm good. You have fun. Finally, we have Green Room. I play in an alternative rock band with punk influences, so this movie hit close to home. A touring band plays in a venue run by neo-Nazis and Captain Picard. I've never seen a movie portray shocking and brutal violence this realistically. I mean it. They handle violence with an eerily medical realism. If you found yourself in a life or death situation where lots of people are trying to kill you and you are trying to kill them, there's not going to be scary music in the background. You and your friends are going to be clumsy with your weapons. If somebody stabs someone else to death, their arms and cheeks and hands and fingers are also going to be cut up in the process. If you slice someone's throat with a box cutter, their skin peels outward. When you stab someone or chop their neck with a machete, there isn't a big slicing sound effect. It's more of a dull thud with a smaller wound than you'd imagine. It gets stuck in the bone. It is that horrifying attention to detail that really makes Green Room an effective horror movie. It's the horror of seeing such viscerally grounded violence. It's the closeness to the real deal that's uncanny. It's the tiny details paid attention in every execution, injury, every decision, and every action that makes this such a scary and near perfect film. Do not show this movie to your parents. Yeah, that's it for horror movies. I care about them a lot, and hopefully you found some new favorites in here. Like I said earlier, Does the Dog Die is a great way to check movies for triggers if you need them, but I always recommend going in for the surprise if you can. Happy Halloween. Thank you for letting me share this fun niche hyperfixation I have with you. Be safe out there, keep an eye out for new music from Raccoon Tour on the 29th, and I'll hopefully be posting more often. Yeah, things are kind of settling down now. Stay safe, stay spicy. I'll see you next time. Thank you. Happy spooky season.